Welcome to The Women's Wisdom, our journey in emergency medicine podcast, a production of the Women in Emergency Medicine section of the American Academy of Emergency Medicine. Join Doctors Molly Estes and Liz Calhoun as they are joined by prominent women in emergency medicine and other special guests.
Hello, and welcome to the next episode of the Women's Wisdom podcast. My name is Liz Calhoun, and I am an attending physician at Mercy Fitzgerald Hospital in Darby, Pennsylvania.
And I'm your other co-host today. My name is Molly Estes. I'm clinical faculty at Northwestern University in Chicago. And today we are very pleased to welcome Dr. Robyn Hitchcock as our guest to the podcast. Now, Dr. Hitchcock is very exciting to have on because she is the recipient of the Sapphire Award from the Women in Emergency Medicine section. And what is the Sapphire Award, you might ask? Well, also named the Norton Award. This award recognizes an individual who has made outstanding contributions to AAEM and or community service. So this is a nominee who has had more than 10 years experience as an emergency medicine doc, specifically practicing in the community. And so we're very, very pleased to welcome you to our show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. And so like everybody else in AAM, I'm a residency trained board certified emergency physician. I have 32 years of clinical bedside experience, including residency. But my big career trajectory change is as of June, I stepped away from clinical medicine and I am doing chart reviews for an insurance company now. But I am continuing to work with the Rural Medicine Interest Group, do advocacy on a state and a national level to try and keep my passions intact. So that's it. That is me in a nutshell.
That's a pretty big career shift coming from someone who has worked in rural medicine, has found passions in rural medicine and palliative care. Tell us a little bit about what brought you to medicine in the first place so that we can talk about what made you pivot later on.
Sure. So I was the kid that always knew I wanted to be a doctor. My mom was a nurse, right? So I was born in the 60s. And I remember looking at books, and at the time in the early 70s, you would read books, and it was Dr. Dan and Nancy Nurse. And my mom was an ER nurse. And one day I went to my mom because she would just come home and tell some cool stories. And I said, Mom, I want to be a nurse just like you. And she said, well, why don't you be a doctor? You get more independence, you have more autonomy, you have more control of this and this and that. You really get to direct things. Think about being a doctor. And I just stared at her with big Google eyes. Girls can be doctors? And she's like, of course girls can be doctors. And I'm like, okay, I'll be a doctor. And that was it. I was 4 or 5 and I had my plan. It was tough for me to figure out when I got to medical school what kind of doctor I wanted to be because I liked everything. So turns out emergency medicine is a great field for somebody who likes everything because we do everything. So I went to medical school in Brooklyn, at downstate. And I trained in emergency medicine in Detroit. And then I did a 1-year locums job in Hawaii. And then I came back and I was in Tahoe for a few years. And during that time, that was the rape of emergency medicine time. They were starting to really attack doctors for contracts and saying, oh, you say that you're an independent contractor, but the hospital is giving you lab coats and scrubs. Therefore, you're an employee. Now you owe us 10 years of back taxes. So they were coming after us with torches and pitchforks. And people just started really panicking. And with the contract restructuring, there was just a lot of instability in the group. So I flipped coasts again and moved to Virginia, where I was for 6 years. And then I kind of burned out of that job there. And then we moved back to the West to Idaho, the Northwest. And I actually stayed home for a couple of years. I didn't know if I was going to go back to medicine. I had one kid with ADHD. I had another one with autism and just, felt like I needed to focus on family for a while. And it turns out I really missed working. I really missed taking care of patients. So within 2 years, I went back to work. I recerted my boards. Went back to work. And so that was I finished residency in 95. And so then in 07 or 08 is when I went back and I've been working steadily since then. I worked at a couple different emergency departments in the North Idaho area. And then when I became an empty nester, part-time in 2018, right? My son was going back and forth to with his dad. So I would get like every other week. I got 1 week a month. And then 2019 launched and went full-time locums. Just kind of, I thought that would be a fun way to wind up my career, make good money, travel, do some fun things. And then the pandemic hit, and that was a rough time to be doing locums because when everything shut down, of course, the locums are the first to go. I had 5 different locums jobs going, and they all shut down on me, and I was really underemployed for a while. And then I found a local critical access hospital, but I was commuting an hour and a half for my shifts there, and ended up renting and doing that and still doing locums for a while. And then I kind of had a big spirally burnout my last 2 years and got escalating physical symptoms and realized that number one, I couldn't afford to retire yet. And number two, I can't be at the bedside anymore. So after months of searching on Indeed and LinkedIn, I found a non-clinical job, which I have been doing since June. So I do chart reviews for an insurance company now, and I'm on the other end of those peer-to-peer calls. So that is me in a nutshell, but I've gotten really passionate about rural medicine. I'm the founder of the Rural Emergency Medicine Interest Group, and I'm still the vice chair, and have continued to work on advocacy, especially for rural health.
So we have a lot to pick apart here and a lot that I really want to ask about. But let's start with something a little more basic because we have a lot of younger listeners to this who might not actually know what a critical access hospital is and how that translates into rural medicine. Can you give us a little more background?
Yeah, so ultimately, a critical access hospital is a specific designation by CMS, I think, that designates it. So one of the requirements is that it has to be 25 or fewer beds at maximum capacity. All the hospital inpatient beds, the emergency department beds aren't counted. So that is one. It has to be, I can't remember if it's 30 miles or 30 minutes away from the nearest facility. And there's a lot that have exclusions, like where I am. There's another critical access hospital with less resources, 20 miles away, but they're an hour away and we're an hour and a half away from a hospital with any ologists, is the nickname that I like to say. So if you want a cardiologist, urologist, pulmonologist, any of anesthesiologists, any ologists, they are an hour and a half away. And so there's places where it's several hours away, right? You can work somewhere in Alaska where it's super, super remote. And then there's other places where it's really just 30 to 45 minutes away. So it's the remoteness, the distance from a higher level of care, as well as the small bed capability. And there's a whole gambit. Like St. Joe's is pretty low. The emergency department is one nurse, one doctor who serves as the ER doc and the hospitalist. And you do 24-hour shifts typically. And that's for your tiny, tiny critical access hospital. And they will have like the MRI van will come by once a week and they'll have MRIs available. Our ultrasound will be in twice a week. And the cardiology tech, you might have echo available 1 day a week. At our facility, we actually have more resources. We have family doctors do deliveries. We don't have OB-GYN. We do have nurse anesthetists that are on call. We have an echo tech, no call. We have an ultrasound tech, no ultrasound on call available. And I've worked at other places where they have ortho, where they have general surgery, where they have echo and ultrasound on call, where they have OB doing deliveries, but still they have that 25 beds and they're 45 minutes away from the regional hospital. So there's a huge gambit in critical access, what's available, but at the core, it's 25 or less beds and like 30 miles or 30 minutes away by ground from the next level of care hospital.
I'm taking it as a personal challenge now in order to figure out a way to say emergencyologist, because I really like that description. So, obviously, in such a unique practice environment that comes with working in a critical access hospital, that comes from doing rural medicine, you must be exposed to a lot of unique challenges as well as very unique rewards practicing in that environment. Can you highlight for us just a few of the reasons why, one, you have decided to continue in your passion for rural medicine, critical access medicine, but two, also just some of the challenges that you found along the way?
So, I mean, at the end of the day, I feel like critical access medicine is why our specialty exists. Really and truly, if you were at a facility, and when I was training in the early 90s and the late 80s when I was in medical school, you would go into these big inner cities and you would have the trauma room staffed by surgery interns. You would have the OB-GYN room, and that was staffed by gynecology. You would have pediatricians in the pediatrics room. You would have internists moonlighting and so on. And so it was different specialties in each room of these big inner cities emergency department. That kind of worked. And if you have all those resources available, you don't really need an emergency physician as much as you do when you are remotely and you don't have a surgeon, you don't have an OB-GYN. You need one person who knows how to do all those things and either treat them and get them better and send them home, or know what to do next, know how to direct them. Do they need a facility that has OB-GYN? Do they need a facility with a cath lab? Do they have GI? Is it a facility that has ERCP capability? Because not all GI docs do that, and not all centers do that. Like, there's 4 different regional hospitals I can send to, only one of them is ERCP capable, that kind of thing. So you've got to know what your resources are and how you need to direct them. And so, and that was back in the days, a little before my time, although still in my time, people would come to the emergency department and they would call their family doctor to see them. And they'd have to wait for their family doctor to come in and see them. And that still exists in some really, really remote models. So I feel like as an emergency physician, we are serving such a very, very needed patient population in the rural community. So for example, we will have in the critical access hospital I work at in Northeast Washington State, we would have residents come in, and the only residents we have regionally are family practice residents. There's no other residents other than Seattle, which is 300 plus miles away. So our local hospital has a family practice program, the regional hospital. And so they'll come out to where we are, and I'm arranging a GI bleed. And I don't remember if it was a varicose bleed and I'm giving octreotide, or I'm typing crossing this and that, and whatever it is I'm doing. And he's just kind of staring at me. And he's like, we usually just call GI and then we're done. And that is sometimes what you do at the bigger regional centers. But when you're in the middle of nowhere, GI is an hour and a half away. 45 minutes if the plane is flying, if the helicopter's flying. But you better know how to resuscitate that person and take care of them and get them stabilized until you can get them to that higher level of care. So part of it's because your skills are so needed and so important. And then the other part of it is just that human touch. So for example, I had both myself and the hospitalist got called to L&D because they had 2 precipitous deliveries come in at the same time. And the family practice doc who does deliveries was 20 minutes out, as they are allowed to be. And they're like, great, we got 2 people delivering. So I haven't done one in a while, but I've at least trained to do a delivery. The hospitalist was even more advanced in their career than me and hadn't done a delivery since they were an intern. So they got the more emergent one to me. And I don't think I've done a delivery in like 10 years. But fortunately, the L&D nurses, they did everything while making it look like I knew what I was doing. So I was so grateful, so grateful to her. Oh, yes, doctor. And so I see you're watching for this. And it's like, oh, yes, I got to watch for that, that kind of stuff. So
L&D nurses the best.
So I delivered the baby. I deliver the baby, big air quotes here. And baby's doing okay. Family doctor comes in and they kind of do some resuscitation and all their magic. And I actually think I clipped the cord. And they did okay. And then they popped into the next room to do the other delivery, right? And so I didn't see mom for very long. I'm mostly looking at lithotomy and the kid and trying to catch the kid and remember how to cut the cord and 2 clamps and all this stuff. It's been a long time. And a couple of months later, I see an 8-year-old belly pain rule out appendicitis. And the mom's in the corner and she's looking at me and she's looking at me and she says, "Did you deliver a baby a couple of months ago?" And I look at her and I'm trying to picture her in a hospital gown. Oh, yeah, I did. How's baby doing? Well, yeah, RSV, but he's doing okay. Everybody's got a cold and blah, 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 blah. And we chit-chatted away. So just that continuity of care that you get in a smaller town, in a smaller environment. Or I had written a blog post actually about, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be here today. And it was a woman, pretty unremarkable case, just a STEMI that I can't remember if I thrombolized them and sent them out or just did really aggressive care. But you get it going fast. And she ended up having to have 2 calves and had several complications, but she was doing great. She was walking, she was active, she was eating healthy and just feeling fantastic. And she says, my husband had a cardiac event and he did not get the care that I got with you. Things were delayed, things didn't happen. Everybody farted around. It took him 3 hours to get to the hospital. And I just feel like the reason I'm here today is because you were there taking care of me. So she was just in for, it was actually honeymoon cystitis. She and her husband had gone on a vacation and she came in with a UTI, which was really cute to see somebody with honeymoon cystitis in their mid-50s. It's inspiring. But just having that follow-up, you're having a hectic day and somebody's like, "Hey, you saved my life. Thank you." And you'll see that with families, or I started doing some palliative care in my last couple of years. And sometimes the family would have buy-in because, "Oh yeah, you took care of my kid's broken arm." Or "I remember when you took care of my grandma's heart failure," or whatever. So there's just really that small town experience and connection that and follow-up, whether you want it or not, that can make your job a lot more rewarding.
Thank you. I bet you could just tell stories for absolutely hours, and especially after such a storied career, all puns fully intended. I can't even imagine all of the different things that you have seen and experienced and been on the front lines and cutting edge of invention as the specialty really has hit its heyday and grown up and also struggled with so many things. In a career as long as yours, in like the full, most honorific sense of that word. You mentioned before we started the recording that there have been a few different mistakes along the way, as well as some very best of best things that you have lived through and seen and experienced. And even you just giving the highlights of your career and mentioning burnout. And I wasn't sure if I would go back. And then I realized I couldn't live without doing this job anymore. I can see glimpses of some of those moments just that are a part of you. What are some of those quote unquote mistakes, air quotes again, that have happened? And what are some of the best parts about this career that really stand out in your mind?
Sure. So my biggest, I think, paperwork mistake was years ago. I think this was 2017. I had left the small hospital I was working at and worked somewhere else because they were more willing to work with me in the schedule on my custody schedule. So they actually wrote their schedule around me. I took a pay cut to go there, and they said, "We will write our schedule around you. You will never have to work on a custody a day again if you don't want to." And so, sold. That was what was more important to me. So I took a pay cut to go to this facility, but the other facility called me for a couple of shifts of help. So I went back to this facility, and I had this trauma patient that came in. He'd fallen off of a cliff while he was hiking and ended up with a couple broken ribs and a pneumothorax. So I put a chest tube in him, and he went back to CT, and the chest tube was found to be intraparenchymal. So instead of outside the lung, it was in between lobes of the lung. And so I talked with surgery. They talked with cardiothoracic and said, we've got at the regional facility, we better send this guy to somewhere with an ologist. In case there's a problem, in case there's damage done, we need to send him down there. And so he was down there for a couple of days. They pulled the tube, they replaced it. He was discharged 3 days later. It didn't end up being a big deal, but he was uninsured. And he sent a letter to the hospital asking for reimbursement because he was uninsured, and because of malpositioning of the chest tube, he had to be transferred and incurred extra cost. So I called my malpractice company, and they said, this isn't malpractice. We looked at the form. This is a known complication of a chest tube. There was no big disaster. You didn't shove it into a vessel or anything, but it was intraparenchymal. They replaced it in the operating room. So we had to go to the operating room. They were ready to do a big procedure if he started, hemorrhaging out or whatever. I don't know why they thought that would happen, but they did. And they said, how do you want to proceed? And this is the mistake. Not, things happen when you do procedures, right? There's complications for procedures. So it's not the malpositioning of the chest tube. I said, well, isn't that why we pay all this malpractice insurance, is so that we can cover these things? Because he said there's no way he would win a lawsuit. This is a known complication of a chest tube. There was no malpractice here. And I said, well, he's a nice guy. He didn't have insurance. It doesn't sound unreasonable to cover his hospital bill. So that's what we did. Well, then a couple of years later, I was doing locums, and I was credentialing to dozens and dozens of institutions. And every single one, I had to pull up, did you have an event? Did you have a this? Did you have a that? And every single time I had to disclose this chest tube event. And sometimes, depending on the wording, because it was technically a payout from my malpractice company. So I was never sued, but it was a payout. So if I could do that over again, I would have said, no, if he wants to sue us, he can sue us, because the amount of paperwork and headache and hassle, and every time I applied, which was dozens and dozens of times over my next 5 years of locums, I had to relive that mistake, that malpositioned chest tube. So even though I've never been sued, not Formica here, I had to disclose this, and it's on the National Practitioner Data Bank. And it was because of my choice to say, well, he seems like a nice guy. Why don't we just cover his bill? Is it that big of a deal? So I wish I had not done that. I wish I had not been nice, because it just created years of headache and hassle for me. So that was kind of my mistake that I would encourage other people not to do. No, if you get sued, you get sued. But if you're not getting sued, don't be the nice guy. It doesn't pay.
I kind of don't know how to respond to that, because unfortunately I can see myself doing the same thing. I mean, haven't we all? There's plenty of errors in patient care in many different ways. We've all made them. We all will continue to make them. It's a part of the job, unfortunately, no matter how perfect we're expected to be. But I think that kind of summarizes a lot of the frustrations in modern medicine. Lots of paperwork and punishment for trying to do right by your patients. That certainly has tipped me towards the burnout road on more than one occasion. And I can imagine that only contributed to yours. So are you able to tell us a little bit about how you pivoted to non-clinical medicine, and the things that you enjoy about your current position?
Yeah. So on the flip side of the mistake, let me just say that the best things are a little shorter. First and foremost, my membership with AAEM. And one thing that I said on when I accepted the award was that if I could mentor every young woman in this room, I would encourage you to take care of your professional selves. And I used to say, I don't need to network, right? I see whatever comes in the door. I don't need to network to get business. I'm not a neurosurgeon in a place heavy with neurosurgeons, or a general surgeon that needs referrals or that sort of thing. And I had no idea for the first 20 years of my career how fulfilling it could be to find your people, to find your niche. And not just going to the meetings, but going to all the social events and finding what drives you. For me, it was wellness, women in emergency medicine, the palliative care interest group, and then forming the rural emergency medicine and interest group, and kind of narrowing down and finding out what your passions are, and finding people within a group that share your passions, and how uplifting that can be, and how soul sustaining that can be is unremarkable. And that actually staved off burnout out for a long time. Another thing that I did that was really wise was work with the whole physician. And I did that whole coaching thing. That, number one, kind of helped me during my last year survive while I was transitioning. And number two, it helped me kind of reframe transitioning. And instead of feeling like I'm a failure because I'm not at the clinical bedside anymore, I'm still struggling with it, but trying to say, I had a 32-year clinical career and it was a good career and I did good for myself and for a lot of people. And now I'm moving to my next step instead of I couldn't do the bedside anymore. I failed. I'm useless. I'm worthless. That negative self-talk. So that helps. And then my other big thing is I kept a blog that I started when I started traveling, and it was intended to be a fun, lighthearted travel journal about some different, mostly small towns all over the country, some travel tips, and some fun, silly emergency department stories. And I started it in 2018. So you can imagine after a couple of years, it took a really, really dark turn. And I think the best part about that is I'm rewriting it. I'm turning it into a book. And I'm not sure if I'm going to traditionally publish it or self-publish it, but my oldest daughter's a graphic designer and artist. And I do encourage you to grow an artist if you don't have artistic capabilities yourselves, because she's got all kinds of ideas and has done a lot of my art for my blog. That's going to be the book. But I'm in COVID now, and they were dark times. I had the president of the country saying doctors are making up this pandemic so they can bill more, when I'm in my 50s, still at the bedside, and before the vaccine, really taking my life into my hands just by continuing to care for my patients. And just all of this dark stuff. And my husband, who has a heart condition, we were wondering, should we separate? Well, but if we're going to die, don't we want to spend time together? I mean, those were daily conversations that we had. And so walking through COVID and back again, but then the permanent staff shortages, I think, is what really got to me after COVID. I stayed active all through COVID. I continued to practice. And the moral injury of not being able to help my sickest patients in this long-term emergency department boarding, I think, is what finally got to me and did me in. And then just being in a completely non-supportive environment. I was working for Providence Health at the time, and they had, if you look on their website, clinician wellness and all of this is important to us. But when rubber meets the road, they just weren't there. And so I would have heart attacks if they were unfortunate enough to have the wrong kind of heart attack. I couldn't transfer them out. A STEMI, sure, they've got to go straight to the cath lab. I could override any kind of volume issues and get them to the cath lab. But your end STEMIs, I think our record was we had one boarding for 10 days. And usually after 5, 7, 10 days, we kind of give up and send them home for an outpatient cath because they're just not going to get a bed. I had horrible GI bleeds that were getting transfused every day, not able to get them to get a scope. I had advanced metastatic cancer with super crazy complications, couldn't get them transferred. Really complicated bowel obstructions that had maybe 20 or 30 surgeries that our general surgeons that work with nurse anesthetists are like, this person's not going to do well. I can't take them to the operating room. They're too complicated. So rather than admit them on the floor, we keep them in the emergency department 3, 4, 5, 7 days until they're getting better. And that just became routine. So in my little 10-bed single coverage emergency department, it was not unusual to have 4 to 6 boarders. And then you're practicing all hallway medicine because there's no beds left to see anybody in. And then again, that small town, it's the same people over and over, and you get to kind of know them and know their families. And, then you're personally the one who is keeping them from getting to where they need. So that was just getting to me. And, the other problem is where I was, only half of the emergency department docs were, when I was first there, I was the only residency trained one. Towards the end, there were a couple more, but there was still a majority of family doctors, and the hospitalists are all family doctors, and a lot of them work in the emergency department too. They didn't see practicing hospital medicine is a big deal, including our ED director, who was a family practice doctor, and the CMO of the hospital, who was a family practice doctor. They don't understand that this is really not what we do as emergency physicians. I was an intern 30 years ago. That's the last time I practiced hospital medicine. I should not be taking care of these people. But the hospital has said, well, we can't round on them. They're in the ER. That's the ER medicine. And they let that go. So I wasn't getting hospitalists back up. I wasn't getting help. And I was trying badly to practice hospital medicine. And so what happened to me was health issues, physical health issues. It started with pre-cancer a couple of years ago. And then about a year ago, I started getting chest pain, shortness of breath. My hemoglobin was in free fall. I went from 15 to 11 to 9. They didn't know where I was coming from. I had a scope that was negative. I landed in the cath lab for an abnormal stress test. My body was just screaming at me that this is not sustainable. I tried doing some palliative care, but I wasn't able to expand that to full time without a fellowship and board certification, and a PGY 32 fellowship for me was kind of a hard stop. And I just realized that it couldn't go on. And again, that's when my coaching helped, because what they do in coaching is there's usually what they're able to do is kind of get your head game in line so that you can not torture yourself after the shift and all this kind of stuff. But in my case, it just, you're done, and that's okay to be done. And let's talk about next steps, and let's talk about a time limit. What? Time limit? That's scary. But then a lot of applications later, because everybody wants a warm body to work in the emergency department. But nobody really wants to give you a chance, especially at my age, to do something else. So, but I finally found an opportunity. So I'm a 9-to-5er now. I sit at a computer all day and review charts, but I'm working from home. I built my retirement home. I hope it will be my retirement room, little 1,600 square foot single level on a beautiful 10-acre lot. I'm 10 minutes from downtown. I'm 10 minutes in the other direction from the airport. So I feel like I'm in the middle of nowhere on this beautiful wooded lot with an enchanting view that I see I'm looking at it right now from my office window. And I'm 10 minutes from all the activity of downtown Spokane, and I'm 10 minutes from the airport. So it's really a great situation. And reading through how rough things are, because I'm working on turning that blog into a book. And again, I'm about halfway through COVID in 2020, just makes me realize how fortunate I am to be doing what I'm doing from where I'm doing. And I'm still practicing medicine, but hopefully I'll be able to continue this advocacy, which does bring a lot of meaning to me.
Having been in Spokane, I can't think of a more beautiful place on earth. It definitely hits my top 5. And it just sounds like you have built this next stage of life for yourself that is hitting all of the things that you value and that you need in order to actually be a person. And it's just really wonderful to hear when we are surrounded by so many frankly, horror stories about the changes of medicine, pre-COVID, middle COVID, now post-COVID, some of the ongoing struggles that our specialty is facing. It's really just beautiful to be able to hear that, yeah, even when things go a certain direction, there are still ways that you can participate in healthcare and remain fulfilled and viable and still be able to live and have the life that you want, need, and frankly deserve after a lifetime of service to your community and your patients. If you could give a pearl of wisdom, a piece of advice, the podcast is Women's Wisdom after all, to anybody coming up in the generations of ER docs behind you, what would it be? I'm curious to see out of all of your experience what you would pick out as a bit of wisdom.
I worked part-time most of my career. I'm actually working now for the last 5 years, more than I have my whole life, because I always considered being a mom the most important thing that I did. And I don't regret that one bit. I never really went on an academic track. I never went on a leadership track. But I took care of people, and I was there at the bedside every day. And I feel good about that. And I feel good that I was there for my family in a very real way. What I didn't do and what I would encourage others to do is take care of your professional selves. Kind of like I said before, for me, I found community within AAEM. I just found it very warm, very welcoming, small enough that once you go to the meetings, the scientific assemblies for a few years, the faces all really look familiar. And then once you found your niche, your interest groups or your sections or whatever, where you're making connections, there's just a real sense of collegiality, and it very much is a brothers in arms, or sisters in arms, as the case may be, that you find people going through similar things with similar passions to you, and that lifts you up in indescribable ways. So taking care of yourself as a mom isn't just having a lunch with a girlfriend or going to a spa. It's taking care of your professional selves as well. And I was really conflicted when I went to the last scientific assembly, because I had just found out a day or I thought I was still going to be able to practice palliative care remotely, and maybe go up to the site every once in a while to do an in-person consult. But we do a lot of consults remotely, working at the 2 hospital system, and they were just eliminating my position completely. So if I wasn't going to be in the emergency department, they weren't going to be able to pay me. And so if I wanted to volunteer my time, that was okay, but that wasn't going to happen. And I kind of felt like a poser when I was at the scientific assembly, because I knew I was walking away from clinical medicine, and I know everything is kind of geared towards clinical medicine. And on that last day, they had a talk, and it was a woman who said, when you're running away from a burning building, look behind you and see who you can help. And that was right around noon on that last day. And he was talking about advocacy, and Dr. Norton was talking about advocacy. And that was just like explosive for me. Yes, I'm running away from a burning building. I can't do it anymore. My body is screaming at me that this is no longer sustainable for me. But I'm going to reach behind me and see who I can lift up. And that's why I'm still trying to stay active in advocacy. I had a meeting with the Associated Press. I had an interview with them this week that Dr. Norton directed them towards, talking about emergency department boarding. I went to the national advocacy that AAEM did in June, not too long after the scientific assembly. I'm planning on going with the Washington State Medical Association advocacy in January. I'm hoping to go back to DC in June, and just kind of doing whatever I can. And the Senator Patty Murray's office called me in, maybe a month after that advocacy date, because they were looking for stories, since I am in a green light state for women's choices, and I am next to Idaho, which is a hard red light state, and we do have some border crossing issues even in the smaller hospitals for care, and some worries and relates to women's choice. And so they are working really hard trying to maintain that ability in Washington State, and we're looking for stories. Well, I got stories. I'm a storyteller. And so when I said the office, reach out to me if I can help you. I want this to be a two-way street. They did. So I feel like I'm starting to build those relationships, and hopefully we'll be able to continue to work moving forward to advocate for rural healthcare.
Wow, I am just so impressed by everything that you have accomplished in your career, and I can understand how everything seems a little frustrating, but I'm glad that you were at our last scientific assembly. I'm glad that you are still advocating for patients, and I'm really glad that you have found some peace in the transition of your career. Whether or not you're practicing clinically, you are still one of us. You're still an emergency physician, and I'm really glad and really proud to call you a part of our community. Well, thank you for joining us today and sharing your story. We'll talk to you next time on the next episode of the Women's Wisdom Podcast. Take care, everyone.
We hope you have enjoyed this podcast from the American Academy of Emergency Medicine. AAEM is a nonprofit professional association of over 8,000 emergency physicians dedicated to board certification and democratic group practice. For more information about AAEM, visit our website at www.aaem.org.